All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a topic that's definitely generated some buzz.
Hmm.
It's based on a source you shared with us, water fasting for weight loss.
Mhm.
You sent over this Q&A guide, and our mission today really is to plunge into that document. We want to pull out its core insights, understand what water fasting is according to the specific source,
Mm,
how it claims to work for weight loss, what potential upsides it mentions, and crucially, the significant risks and limitations it highlights.
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Think of us as sort of navigating this specific piece of material you gave us. Our goal is just to quickly get you up to speed on what this guide itself considers the absolute key points about this, well, pretty tense approach to fasting.
Right.
It's less about summarizing everything ever known about water fasting, more about distilling the essential wisdom and, maybe more importantly, the warnings from your particular source.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Let's dive right in then. To start, what's the basic definition? What does this guide you looked at actually say water fasting is?
Well, what your guide makes clear right at the top is that it's exactly what it sounds like, but maybe uh, even more restrictive than some might think.
Okay.
It defines it as consuming only water for a specific period, and it's really firm on what only means. Zero food, absolutely no calorie-containing drinks, and usually no supplements unless they're, medically necessary and prescribed.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's explicitly calls this the most extreme form of fasting.
The guide mentions it's not a totally new idea, though, does it? It touches on history.
It does, yeah. Your source briefly mentions its long history, practices in different cultures and religions going back centuries, often for spiritual reasons or like purification.
Mm-hmm.
But the modern thing, the resurgence the guide talks about it, is heavily tied to trying to get rapid fat loss and these sort of metabolic resets.
Okay, so how does this really extreme approach, just water,
Yeah.
how does the guide say that actually leads to weight loss? What's the mechanism it describes?
So what the guide points to as the main driver is simply the massive calorie deficit. I mean, it's huge. When you cut out all food, your body has to find energy somewhere else.
Right. And does it spell out how that energy shift happens?
Yes, it does. And this is, I think, a key insight from the material you shared. It describes a pretty distinct metabolic shift. So initially, for maybe the first 24 to 48 hours, your body burns through its stored carbs, that's glycogen.
Okay, the easy access fuel.
Exactly. Once those stores are, pretty much used up, like emptying the quick fuel tank,
Yeah.
your guide says the body then shifts into ketosis.
Ah, ketosis. That word comes up all the time in diet talk. What does this source, this guide, say ketosis means here?
In this specific context, the guide explains ketosis is when the body starts breaking down stored fat. It turns that fat into these molecules called ketones,
Right.
and those become the body's main fuel source instead of glucose. The insight here is that continuing the water fast keeps you in that state, keeps you in fat-burning mode.
Interesting.
Oh, and the guide also notes that having much lower insulin levels during the fast helps this fat breakdown process too.
Okay, that makes sense. So, forcing the body into fat burning mode. It sounds like there must be some appealing benefits mentioned. What upsides does this guide list?
Your source definitely outlines several potential immediate benefits that might make someone consider it. It points to rapid weight loss for sure,
Okay.
though it does clarify that a lot of that initial drop is temporary, mostly water and the glycogen you just burned off.
Ah, okay.
It also mentions this idea of an appetite reset after the fast, saying some people report fewer cravings.
Fewer cravings after stopping. That is interesting. What else does it list?
The guide also lists improved insulin sensitivity, which could help stabilize blood sugar. That's potentially a big deal. It brings up autophagy, too.
Autophagy.
Yeah, describing it as like the body's way of cleaning house, getting rid of damaged cells and making new ones,
Hmm.
kind of an internal cleanup crew. And based on what people report, it mentions some experience enhanced mental clarity and focus during a fast.
Those do sound quite compelling on the surface anyway.
They do, yeah, but this is where your guide really provides that crucial balance. It immediately follows listing these potential benefits by stating very clearly that these advantages are not without potential drawbacks.
Ah.
That pivot, right there in the document, is a really strong signal about needing to be cautious.
That's a really important transition. So let's get straight to the safety warnings then. Is water fasting, according to the source, something just anyone can decide to do?
Definitely not. It's an emphatic NO, according to your guide. That's probably one of its most critical messages. It lists specific groups of people who should absolutely not do it or who must talk to a doctor first, no question.
Okay, so who's on that high-risk list based on this material you shared?
It's pretty comprehensive.
Hmm.
It includes people with any type of diabetes, especially if they're on insulin,
Uh.
anyone with existing heart or kidney problems, people with a history of eating disorders like anorexia or bulimia,
Mm-hmm.
women who are pregnant or breastfeeding, and also children and teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and it specifically warns against it for anyone taking medications that need to be taken with food.
Wow, that covers a lot of people.
It really highlights that this is, far from something everyone can just try.
Yeah.
And the guide actually extends that caution even to people who seem perfectly healthy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, strongly recommending they talk to a healthcare professional before trying any extended fast. It's definitely not presented as something to take lightly.
Okay, so with that level of restriction and all those warnings, there must be side effects. What does your source say people should expect on the downside?
Yeah, the guide doesn't really sugarcoat this part. It details a range of side effects. And it notes that how bad they are can depend on how long you fast and your own health situation.
Makes sense.
The common symptoms it lists are things like headaches, dizziness, or feeling lightheaded, fatigue, just general low energy, irritability, mood swings.
Doesn't sound like much fun.
No, not really. And it goes on to mention muscle cramps, low blood pressure, even constipation. For longer fasts, your guide brings up more serious risks, like nutrient deficiencies developing over time and electrolyte imbalances, which can be dangerous.
Electrolyte imbalances. Okay.
Yeah. And a key point the material makes here is that these risks get much more common and concerning during extended fasts. It defines that as anything over about 3 days.
Okay.
This just reinforces why I keep saying you need medical oversight for those longer durations.
Right. Okay. So, if someone is doing this, thinking about weight loss, what are the typical lengths of time the guide mentions, and what kind of weight loss numbers does it suggest are, realistic?
Your guide kind of breaks down the durations based on risk and what people tend to do. It talks about short fasts, like 24 to 72 hours,
Okay.
and considers those relatively safe for healthy people, probably more common. Then there are extended fasts, say 4 to 7 days, maybe even longer.
Yeah.
The source says these carry much higher risks. And importantly, it repeats that these should only be done under medical supervision. It also mentions intermittent fasting patterns later on, like 16.8, or doing a 24-hour fast once a week as more of a sustainable lifestyle thing for maintenance.
Gotcha. And the actual weight loss figures, what does the guide say about that?
It does give some averages, but with a really important caveat. It says you might lose, say, 1 to 2 kilograms. That's maybe 2 to 4 pounds in the first day or two.
Wow, that's
It
fast.
sounds fast, but the guide immediately points out this is mostly water weight and the glycogen you've used up. So a temporary loss.
Ah, okay. The initial whoosh.
Exactly. After about day 3, when true fat burning is supposed to be more dominant, it cites an average loss of maybe 0.5 to 1 kilogram per day. So roughly 1 to 2 pounds a day.
Still significant.
It is, but the guide is careful to clarify. So while maybe a 5-day fast could lead to a total loss of, say, 3 to 6 kilos, that's maybe 6 to 13 pounds, the source makes it explicit that a good chunk of that initial loss isn't permanent body fat. That distinction is a really valuable insight from this material.
Yeah, that definitely clarifies those dramatic initial drops you sometimes hear about. Now, your guide mentioned intermittent fasting as less extreme. How does it actually differentiate between dedicated water fasting and those patterns like 16.8 or 5.2?
The guide draws a very clear line, mostly based on how long you go without calories and the absolute restriction. Water fasting is, well, nothing but water for days straight.
Right, total restrictions.
Total restriction. Intermittent fasting, on the other hand, involves limiting when you eat to specific windows of hours each day or cutting calories way down on just a couple of days a week.
Okay.
But you're still eating some food within those patterns.
So it's the 0 calories for multiple days versus structured eating times.
Exactly. Your guide contrasts the duration. Days for water fasting versus hours daily, or maybe 1-2 days weekly for IF. It contrasts the food intake. None versus a limited window. It points out the difficulty. High for water fasting, more moderate for IF. And it talks about common uses. Water fasting, often for a short-term reset, maybe spiritual reasons. IF, more for an ongoing lifestyle, weight maintenance. The conclusion the material draws here is pretty insightful if it's presented as way more sustainable long-term.
That makes a lot of sense just intuitively as a habit, but going back to the intensity of water fasting, There's often a concern about losing muscle, right? When you're not eating anything. Does the source address that?
It absolutely does, yeah. And it confirms that muscle loss is a real concern, especially if the fast goes on for a while.
Okay.
The guide explains that early on, before your body fully adapts to burning fat efficiently, it can actually break down muscle protein to make glucose for energy. It's a process called gluconeogenesis.
So the guide confirms it's a risk. Does it offer any advice on how to minimize losing muscle?
Yes, thankfully it does give some practical tips based on this risk. It suggests keeping water fasts shorter rather than longer. It advises against doing strenuous workouts during the fast itself.
Right, take it easy.
Exactly. And then making sure you break the fast with meals high in protein and getting back into strength training once you're eating normally again.
Okay, that sounds like really crucial advice. Speaking of practicalities, if someone were going to try this, based on what the guide says, what steps does it lay out for preparing, actually doing the fast, and maybe most importantly, how to end it safely?
The guide gets quite detailed here, which kind of tells you how seriously it views the whole process. For preparation, it recommends gradually cutting back on food for maybe 2 or 3 days beforehand.
Ease into it.
Yeah, ease into it. Cut out things like sugar, caffeine, processed foods. It stresses hydrating really well before you even start and making sure you're well rested before and during the fast.
Okay.
And it also talks about mental prep, being clear on why you're doing it and knowing what side effects might pop up. The insight here is really about making it a slow, mindful transition into the fast.
And during the fast itself, what does the guide say to do?
During the fast, the main thing is drink plenty of water. It recommends like 2 to 3 liters a day. It advises resting, avoiding heavy activity, and crucially, it tells you to constantly monitor how you feel.
Super important.
Absolutely. It lists specific red flags, things like severe dizziness, fainting, chest pain that mean you need to stop immediately. It also suggests avoiding stress, maybe doing only very low intensity things like a short walk or reading, and keeping track of how it's going, perhaps in a journal. The core message is really, listen to your body, don't be a hero, and push through severe symptoms.
That monitoring piece seems non-negotiable, and breaking the fast safely, that sounds like a point where things could easily go wrong if you're not careful.
Your guide really highlights this, maybe as the most critical step. It warns about digestive shock. So it advises starting really gently, maybe just clear liquids first, like broth or diluted juice.
Okay.
Then moving to soft foods, like maybe some steamed vegetables or soft fruits. The idea is to gradually reintroduce protein and fats over the next 1 to 3 days.
Slowly does it.
Yeah, very slowly. And there's a really serious warning here. Just diving back into big meals right after a fast can cause major discomfort, bloating, nausea. But in extreme cases, especially after longer fasts, it can risk a dangerous condition called refeeding syndrome. This part of the guide really hammers home the need for patience and a very deliberate process when you start eating again.
Wow. Refeeding syndrome. That sounds something everyone needs to know about if they're even considering this. The guide also briefly touches on exercise and psychological effects, right?
It does, yeah. For exercise, the material basically says light stuff like walking or gentle yoga is generally okay during short fasts. But again, listen to your body, avoid anything intense. For longer fasts, minimizing exertion is the way to go.
Okay.
And psychologically, the guide notes it can be a mixed bag. Some people report positives like feeling clearer mentally, maybe a mood boost or increased self-discipline. But it also lists potential negatives: irritability, anxiety, maybe becoming overly focused on food, or even an increased risk of binge eating after the fast is over.
Ah, the rebound effect.
Exactly. The insight here is that the mental and emotional side, preparing for it, being self-aware during and after, is just as vital as the physical stuff.
So it sounds like the fast itself is framed as this powerful but definitely temporary thing. Does your source present it as like the magic answer for keeping weight off long term?
Oh, absolutely not. That's another really key takeaway from the material you shared. It's very, very clear that while water fasting can be a powerful kickstart or reset,
Right.
keeping off any weight loss requires fundamental lasting changes to your lifestyle. No shortcuts there.
So how does the guide suggest using the fast effectively then if the real work comes after?
Your guide frames it as a tool you might use strategically, but definitely not as a crutch to make up for unhealthy habits.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that the fast must be followed by a balanced, nutrient-rich diet. It suggests incorporating sustainable strategies afterwards, like maybe intermittent fasting or just being mindful of calories, getting regular exercise, and managing stress. The material is explicit. Water fasting alone won't guarantee long-term success. It's all about the habits you build afterwards.
The guide mentions success stories, though. Does it give any context around those?
It does acknowledge that people have reported significant results.
Yeah.
Yeah, substantial weight loss,
Yeah.
better markers for things like prediabetes, lower blood pressure, feeling better mentally.
So it can work for some people?
It can. But the crucial context the guide adds is that these success stories often involved getting medical guidance during the fast, and perhaps more importantly, they involve disciplined, permanent lifestyle changes after the fast.
So it reinforces that after point again.
Exactly. It reinforces that the fast was often just the catalyst, not the whole solution itself.
That makes sense. What about the broader landscape? Does your source mention different expert opinions on this? Are doctors all on the same page?
Your guide summarizes the expert views as pretty mixed, which reflects the ongoing debate. It says some experts are supportive, seeing potential therapeutic uses, but usually only when it's done under strict medical supervision.
Okay.
Others are much more cautious, strongly warning against doing longer fasts without supervision because the risks are just too real.
Right.
And mainstream medical opinion, as your guide presents it, tends to favor more gradual, evidence-based weight loss methods.
Yeah.
The material notes that while there is growing clinical research on some aspects like inflammation or insulin sensitivity, there's still a big need for more long-term studies on safety and effectiveness, especially outside of those very controlled medical settings.
That uncertainty really underlines the need for caution. And for people listening who hear all this and think, okay, maybe water fasting isn't for me, does your source mention any safer alternatives for weight management?
Yes, it does list several options, generally seen as more sustainable and less risky.
Yeah.
Things like intermittent fasting, the 16.8 or 5.2 patterns.
Right.
Time-restricted eating, which is just limiting your eating to a set window each day. It mentions low-calorie diets, but specifically under professional guidance. Ketogenic diets get a mention too, since they kind of mimic the fat-burning state without total fasting.
Okay.
And even less intense things like some structured detox or juice fasts. Your guide makes a really valuable point here. Each of these has its own pros and cons, and the best fit really depends on your health, your lifestyle, what you can actually stick with long term.
That's helpful, having a range of options. Okay, let's try and pull all the threads from this guide together. What are the absolute core takeaways it seems to want you, the listener, to walk away with?
Yeah, your guide synthesizes it really effectively in its conclusion. It repeats that water fasting can be a powerful short-term tool. It can lead to rapid loss, maybe offer a metabolic reset, with potential benefits like more fat burning and better insulin sensitivity.
Okay, the potential upside.
But T, and this is really the guide's most insistent message, it comes with significant potential risks, and it is definitely not for everyone.
So the big message is caution and context.
Precisely. The guide's final insights really boil down to this. While it might be a potent kickstart, it absolutely must be approached with thorough preparation and, ideally, medical supervision. It should never be seen as a substitute for building lasting healthy habits. And maybe the most critical takeaway of all, the success of water fasting for any kind of long-term result is entirely dependent on what happens after the fast is over. Your guide's final advice is crystal clear. If you're considering this, get incredibly informed, maybe start small if you do anything at all, and always put your long-term health first.
That really lands the core message from the document we explored today. We've taken a pretty thorough deep dive into the specific source you shared, unpacking what it says about water fasting, the mechanics, the potential upsides, and those really crucial risks. And the central theme that just keeps coming up from this guide is that while, yeah, water fasting can be a tool for a short-term reset, the real work, the real challenge, and honestly, the real lasting impact comes from building and sticking to consistent, healthy habits after the fast ends.
Yeah.
This guide makes it abundantly clear it's not the fast itself that guarantees anything long-term. It's the sustainable changes that follow it.
It really shifts the focus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
From the dramatic short-term action to the maybe less glamorous but way more impactful long-term consistency.
Exactly. And perhaps the most important deep dive that this source material points us towards isn't just into the mechanics of not eating, but into how you build and maintain those healthy habits day in, day out for the long haul. So as you reflect on this information from your guide, maybe think about what parts resonate most with your own situation. Consider those safer alternatives it mentioned. And if you're seriously thinking about any kind of fasting, especially something this intense, let this guide be the nudge to have that absolutely essential